The Sau Mau Ping estate, a public housing estate in Kwun Tong, East Kowloon, Hong Kong, looked perfectly normal from the outside, but it had a dark reputation. It was a low-income area known for trouble, and over the years it had become a hideout for gangs. Unruly kids would hang around there, and sometimes they'd drag the people they didn't like to the bullies to teach them a lesson. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Today's story is about a young gang member whose life came to a horrifying end, all because he refused to watch a kind man with disabilities get bullied. This is the story of Luk Chi Wai, a boy who tried to do the right thing and was instead tortured to death by 14 of his own gang members. Some sources say the victim was 15, others say he was 16, but regardless of his exact age, what happened to him remains one of the most disturbing cases in Hong Kong's criminal history. This is the Sau Mau Ping gang murder. In May 1997, a janitor in his mid-30s, a man with an intellectual disability, walked into a hospital. His body was covered in injuries and bruises. What he told the nurses that day would blow the entire case wide open. But to understand how things got to that point, we need to go back to the beginning. At its peak, the Sau Mau Ping estate encompassed 45 crowded tenement blocks. It was originally built in the 1960s, and by 1997, a redevelopment plan was already underway. By the time this incident took place, most of the flats had been vacated. Sau Mau Ping had long carried a reputation as a bad area in the more isolated part of Kwun Tong. At the time, it was largely populated by lower-income foreign workers, many of them Thai, who faced severe discrimination. A lot of the gang members involved in this case actually were of mixed Thai and Hong Kong Chinese heritage. The adults in the area worked multiple full-time jobs, often jobs labeled unskilled, such as construction work, waiting tables, maintenance work, and the like. The pay was meager, and they spent most of their waking hours just trying to earn enough to make ends meet. As the parents were out at all hours trying to provide for their families, the kids grew up with little to no supervision. And because of that, teenage gangs started popping up all over the estate. Some just played games together. Others took it further, bullying anyone they saw as weak or anyone who refused to join their group. It got to the point where some parents actually saw their kids joining a gang as a good thing, because at least it meant they wouldn't be the ones getting bullied. The Sau Mau Ping estate was essentially a gang battleground. Multiple gangs operated there, each with their own hideout, their own territory, and their own recruitment efforts. The gang we'll talk about today was led by Hui Chi Wai, his brother Hui Chi Young, and 3 of their friends from school. From that point on, Hui became the Dago, the big brother of the group, leading everyone in their little adventures. He was later reportedly recruited by a local triad. Some accounts claim it was the Sun Yeon triad, though this connection has never been definitively confirmed. Either way, it changed the dynamics of the group entirely. Hui formed a small crew, and what started as a loose circle of friends slowly began to resemble a juvenile gang. And those still attending school were known for their poor grades and even poor attitudes. No matter how hard the teachers tried to discipline them, they just wouldn't listen. Instead of studying, they'd sit around looking bored, and outside of school, they'd idle on the streets or hang out at each other's houses. Around this time, a lot of the youth in the area, including this group, were obsessed with a comic series called Teddy Boy. The story followed a character named Chan Ho Nam, who rose from a 49er, the lowest rank in a triad, to a red pole, or enforcer, in just 3 years. Many believe the comic gave these boys a romanticized view of triad life, which only made them more drawn to the gangster lifestyle. Before long, Hui's group crossed paths with another clique, a boy named Fu Hin Chun, who the neighborhood kids called the King, along with Shek Tse Kin and Luk Chi Wai. As time went on, the two groups grew closer and eventually agreed to merge into a single gang. They devoted themselves to the teddy boy lifestyle, treating the comic's main character as their hero and modeling their activities after his. With the merger, Fu and Hui had a group of more than 10 members. They expanded their territory and started calling themselves the estate's main gang, using Dynasty as their prefix. But every gang needs a base, and the location for that was simple: the flat of Chan Mukching. Chan Mukching was an ordinary man in his mid-30s. Despite his mild intellectual disability, he had no trouble with his work. People in the neighborhood called him third uncle. In Cantonese culture, it's common to give older men in the community an honorary uncle title as a sign of respect. It didn't mean he was anyone's actual relative. It was just what people called him. He was known around the estate as a kind, hardworking janitor. People would ask him to clean their area and tip him a little extra for doing a good job. He used to smile a lot, but sadly the gang members called his smile stupid. Now, the gang didn't start bullying Chan right away. In the beginning, the teens were just involved in typical juvenile delinquent activities: skipping school, playing games all day, smoking, drinking beer, and playing mahjong at Chan's house. Nothing extreme. For a while, things were actually peaceful. But that changed once Hui Chiwai got connected to the local triad. It went to his head. He started thinking he was the coolest one in the group, the one everyone should fear. And to prove his dominance, he started bullying Chan. He saw Chan as the perfect target, someone who wouldn't fight back. Whenever there was even a small disagreement among the gang members, it would put Hui in a bad mood. And instead of taking it out on the others, he'd use Chan as his human punching bag. The rest of the gang followed his lead. They'd mock Chan, make fun of his disability, and pick on everything he did. And if he happened to show his face when they were already in a bad mood, he would suffer a long night of punches and kicks. But not everyone in the gang was happy with this. One member had a slightly different moral compass: Luke Chiwai. Luke genuinely liked hanging out with Chan, and at first, he enjoyed the gang's activities, the games, the mahjong, the small bets. After all, he had joined the gang purely because he loved being around other people. But when they started getting into petty crimes like underage drinking and shoplifting, he wasn't so comfortable anymore. Still, he tried his best to go along with it. He didn't want to be labeled as a traitor. When the gang chose Chan's flat 1508 of Block 39, as their official hangout spot, Luke started spending more and more time with Chan. While the others were off playing games, cursing out rival gangs, or bullying other kids in the area, Luke would sit and talk with Chan about anything and everything. He found a genuine friend in the janitor. He never agreed with the gang using Chan as a punching bag, and he never took part in it. After every beating the gang gave Chan, Luke would stay behind to clean up Chan's flat and tend to his wounds. And as a result, Chan came to trust Luke deeply, even describing him as the best among anyone. When Chan found out about Hui's involvement with the triad, he warned Luke. He advised him not to follow the gang any deeper into a life of crime, and even told him to quit altogether. But the word of that advice eventually reached Hui's ears, and that's when everything spiraled. Hui started bullying Chan even harder, and sometimes the violence reached Luke too. On the evening of May 12, 1997, the two leaders of the gang, Hui and Fu, gathered more than 10 members at Chan's flat. According to some accounts, the trigger was that Chan had reported Hui's truancy to Hui's mother, which got Hui scolded by his parents. Furious, Hui branded Chan as a traitor for undermining the gang. He ordered the other teens to take turns punching and kicking him. And at some points, multiple people beat him at the same time. The beatings lasted for hours. Some accounts say 2, others say 3, and they didn't just use their fists. They brought out folding stools, metal pipes, and even smashed small cabinets from Chan's own home over his body. By the time it was over, Chan's face was swollen beyond recognition and covered in blood. He could barely lift a finger. Some reports even suggest he was on the verge of death. The brutality of the beating left him terrified. He stopped leaving his flat. He hid in his room, too afraid to face the gang members who were still using his home as their hangout. At that point, Luke couldn't bear to see his suffering anymore. Chan was a kind person. He didn't deserve to live in pain and fear. Luke urged Chan to call the police and report what the gang had done. But that piece of advice, the one meant to help a vulnerable person in need, would end up costing Luke his life. One of the members overheard Luke telling Chan to go to the police. They reported it straight to the gang's leaders. Luke was branded as a traitor, and the gang decided he needed to be punished. And it wasn't going to be a light punishment. They wanted to make him truly regret what he'd done. On the evening of May 14th, the gang lured Luke to a spot in the estate where kids often played. Hui and part of the group were waiting for him there, while the rest went to Chan's flat to set up an ambush. The plan was simple. No matter which way Luke ran, whether toward the estate exit or back to Chan's place, someone would be there to grab him. Luke fled straight to Chan's flat, where the ambush team was already waiting. They caught him, and with that, the hellish night of torture began. The gang punched and kicked Luke for hours. After one round of beatings, Fu told everyone to stop, but not because he felt sorry for Luke, who was on his knees begging them for mercy. No. Fu stopped them because he was bored. He wanted something more exciting, something more entertaining to watch. One of them grabbed a buckled leather belt and started lashing Luke with it. At one point, the belt hit him square in the head, and the whole gang burst out laughing. It only got worse from there, and it bears repeating that these gang members were aged between 14 and 17, because it only makes their actions more shocking. The teens beat him with iron pipes, plastic broomsticks, wooden poles, an umbrella, and folding stools. They used a move they called the human pile driver, holding Luke upside down and slamming his head into the ground repeatedly. Watching Luke grow more and more helpless seemed to amuse them. To make the whole thing feel more like a real gangster ritual, they used a statue of Guan Yu, a legendary figure from the Three Kingdoms period whose image is associated with loyalty, righteousness, and warding off evil. In the Triad world, Guan Yu is essentially seen as their main deity. Luke was made to kneel in front of the statue and read the Triad's motto aloud. The sight of this drove them into a frenzy. The teens grew more and more excited with every blow. One by one, each gang member was called to take their turn assaulting Luke, like a roll call of cruelty. They tried to force him to eat cigarette butts. When he refused, he got beaten even harder. Every time Luke passed out, they poured freezing water over his face to wake him up, just so they could keep going. He begged them to stop, and they didn't listen. After roughly 3 hours of continuous torture, Luke lost consciousness completely. Blood was streaming from his nose, and his face was so badly deformed from being slammed into the walls and floor that it was barely recognizable. It appeared that several of his bones were broken. When the gang finally noticed he was no longer breathing, wasn't moving at all, they panicked. They tried to revive him, but it was too late. Luke had died at around midnight. Once they realized what they'd done, they didn't respond with genuine remorse, only self-preservation. The group decided to get rid of the body by burning it. Fu took charge. He directed the gang to remove Luke's shorts, then wrap his head and hands with wire and plastic bags to ensure they didn't leave any evidence behind. They stuffed his body into a cardboard box and dragged it to a part of the estate that had already been cleared for redevelopment. There, they doused the body in chemicals and set it on fire. Some sources say they used sulfuric acid and paraffin. Others report it was thinners and petrol. Whatever they used, they didn't just burn Luke's body once. After the first fire died down, they came back and burned it a second time, making absolutely sure no one would be able to identify the victim. What remained of Luke was disposed of at a nearby trash collection point, hidden among the rubbish. Now, with the body destroyed and barely recognizable, how did the police ever crack this case? The answer lies with Chan Muk-ching. So Chan was present during the entire ordeal. He suffered abuse that night too, although not nearly as severely as Luk, since he wasn't a gang member. But he witnessed almost everything, from the moment Luk lost his life to the moment the gang prepared to get rid of his body. In fact, the gangs forced Chan to remain at the flat with the body of his deceased friend for an entire day, while they prepared to dispose of it. The gang members knew Chan had seen everything, but because of his disability, they figured a few threats would be enough to keep him quiet. That turned out to be a fatal miscalculation. Not long after the incident, still in May 1997, Chan finally went to the hospital. He wasn't feeling well. The nurse who attended to him was immediately alarmed. His body was covered in injuries and bruises, only some of which looked fresh. He had broken ribs. I fell from a high place, Chan told her, but the nurse didn't buy it, especially once she found out where he lived, a place well known for gang activity. She noticed how he avoided eye contact, how timid and frightened he seemed. He looked exactly like someone who had been attacked. Instead of pressing him, the nurse took a gentler approach. She talked to him about the things he liked, slowly gaining his trust. And eventually, Chan opened up. When the nurses and doctors heard what he had to say, they immediately called the police. Because what Chan said was, "I just witnessed a murder committed by gang members." The police moved fast. They followed Chan's account of what had happened and traced the disposal route to a landfill in Takuling, where Chan said the victim's remains had been dumped. At first, they found nothing. But eventually, officers recovered a few bone fragments believed to belong to the victim, Luk Chi-wai. Over the following 2 weeks, the police arrested 14 teenagers in association with the crime, 11 males and 3 females. Of those, 13 went on trial in September 1998 at the court of first instance, 10 boys and 3 girls, all of whom denied the charge of murder. The 14th, Shek Tse-kin, pleaded guilty and agreed to testify as a prosecution witness. The defense team argued that the group never intended to kill Luk, they only wanted to punish him. They said the teenagers regretted their actions and have even tried to revive Luk when they realized he wasn't moving. The lawyers claimed that the violent cartoons and movies the juveniles had consumed play a significant role in their behavior, making them believe their torture wouldn't actually be lethal. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They refused to make any plea deals for manslaughter and pushed forward with murder charges, especially once the full details of the torture came to light. After a year-long trial, 6 of the defendants were convicted of murder in January 1999. The presiding judge, Michael Wong Kin Cho, explained his reasoning. Rather than killing swiftly with a stabbing or a gunshot, these gang members had tortured Luk in various ways for 3 hours until he died in excruciating pain, which, in the judge's view, demonstrated clear intent to cause grievous bodily harm resulting in death. Wong acknowledged that sentencing juveniles was tragic, but he said it would go against justice to hand out anything less than what the severity of the crime demanded. In a courtroom packed with weeping families and friends, the sentences for those charged with murder were handed out. The gang's leaders, Hui Chi-wai and Fu Hin-chun, along with 2 other members, were sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge said they deserved it for torturing Luk without an ounce of mercy. Meanwhile, one 17-year-old gang member received 26 years, and one 14-year-old member received 23 years. The judge took their more limited involvement into account. 5 other gang members, aged between 14 and 15, were found guilty of grievous bodily harm, or lesser offenses like battery. They had already been held in custody for 21 months by the time of sentencing, and the judge decided not to punish them further, ordering their immediate release. Yuan Kit-yi, a 14-year-old girl, was convicted of battery and preventing lawful burial. Her lawyer argued she had been under the influence of her boyfriend, Eung Ming-chun, one of the gang members who had received a life sentence. Wang Shixing, who had reportedly tried to convince the others to stop, was convicted of manslaughter by the jury. Both were sentenced to 16 months in a juvenile detention center due to their relatively limited involvement. As for Shek, who had pleaded guilty to manslaughter and testified against his former gang members, he received 7 years in prison. The judge praised him for cooperating fully with the police and said he believed Shek felt genuine remorse. He encouraged him to reform himself. Now back to the 6 who were convicted of murder. In 2001, they successfully appealed on the grounds that the original sentences were manifestly excessive. 3 of the gang members had their sentence reduced. Hui Chi-wai, Fu Hin-chun, and the remaining teen were allowed to appeal their sentences only after serving a minimum term. Under Hong Kong law, even someone sentenced to life imprisonment can eventually be released on parole, provided they've served at least 20 years and maintained a record of good behavior. On the surface, it might seem like the punishments were enough to make the perpetrators reflect on what they'd done. But the perpetrators were all minors at the time, most of them between 14 and 16 years old. So it caused many to ask the question, what happens when they get out? Do they just blend back into society with no one knowing what they're capable of? Others argued that decades behind bars would be enough to change them for the better. And as of the time of this recording, most of the convicted has since been released. But not all of them are around today. It's rumored that Hui Chi-wai, the gang's second-in-command, died of lung cancer while still in prison. And on Christmas Day in 2007, Lau Pui-yi, one of the acquitted female members, jumped to her death from Shuntin Estate near Sau Mau Ping after losing her job and her partner. She left behind a note that simply read, "Unhappy." The case was later adapted into several forms of media, most notably a 1999 Hong Kong film called Street Kids Violence. The movie depicted the tragedy in detail, in the hope that people would remember what happened, and remember the name Luke Chi-wai, a boy who died because he tried to help a friend. Luke did what most people would call the right thing. He saw someone vulnerable being beaten, and he told that person to go to the police. That's it. That's all he did. And for that, he was tortured for 3 hours so badly that he eventually succumbed to his injuries. And then his body was burned beyond recognition. He was just a teen, and terrifyingly, so were his killers. Most of them walked free before they turned 40. If you walk down a street in Hong Kong tomorrow, you might pass them with no idea what cruelty they had inflicted. So, what do you think about this case? Do you think justice was served, or do you think the punishment wasn't enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and that is enough for today. Thanks for watching.